Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we've had a lot of meetings where
Right.
we're scratched for free.
So good afternoon. We're going to call the Board of Finance meeting to order. And our package, along with the agenda, has been circulated. We're going to follow the agenda as circulated. And the first order of business is the approval of the minutes from our prior meeting. I would ask for a motion.
Move it.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
And seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes have been passed. The next order of business is the consideration and approval of the security transactions.
Thank you. So this report is from the period of February 19th through March 15th, 2024. We have total purchases of $337 million. For redemptions, same time period, $332,428,201. And this concludes the report. Yes.
Question?
It's not a question. There's a typo that probably should be corrected before this becomes part of next month's minutes.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, at the top, it says transactions since those reported at meeting of March 25th. And shouldn't that be since February 29th or whenever the, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that correction, a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second? And seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
That motion has passed. The next order of business is the discussion and presentation of the swap results.
Yes. So we have the report as of February 28th, 2024. For the water, 2008 bonds, the fair market value is $4,602,739. For parking, UBS is the holder, $4,601,596. A total portfolio of the fair market value of $9,204,335. The 10-year Treasury moved from 3.99 to 4.25 from January to February. And it's nothing really exciting about the report. And there we had not posted any collateral for this period.
I think it's exciting to see it continue to come down.
Yes, yes.
So that's a degree of excitement. And again, this is a report. Are there any questions? Hearing none, the report is as presented. And our next order of business is the consideration for the fiscal year 2025 through 30 capital improvement plan.
Thank you. So this is a report that's submitted annually by the Department of Planning to approve the capital budget and the 6-year CIP. So this year, the FY25 capital budget totals $661,849,907, which includes $80 million in general obligation bonds, and the 6-year capital improvement program covering the period of fiscal year 2025 to 2030. The total amount is $3,718,825,043. So just for an overview, the city charter requires that the Planning Commission submit a recommended 6-year CIP for approval by the Board of Estimates. The Board of Estimates require that this board and the Department of Finance to review and comment on the CIP. The first year of the CIP will become the basis of the capital budget and the ordinance of estimates to be considered by City Council. Following the board's consideration, the clerk to the board shall submit a letter of recommendation on behalf of the Board of Finance to the Board of Estimates. We have provided 3 tables in the memo. One is by source of funds, The other one is distribution by city agency, and then the other one's the composition of the general obligation bonds in the general fund for that time period. So I would just like to point out that as in past renditions of this report, that the Department of Public Works have majority of the Capital II projects within this plan. We have $1.9 billion over this the 6-year period, which represents 53% of the CIP. And their projects include upgrades to the wastewater treatment plants, the pumping stations, water meter replacements, water infrastructure rehabilitation, and just overall improvement to the infrastructure and environmental restoration. We have $1.3 billion in revenue bonds to support the capital improvement for the water, wastewater, and stormwater facility. The bonds will not be considered, will not affect the general obligation, will not affect the general fund, and does not constitute a pledge of the general credit. The provisions or the indenture for the bonds require that we meet a minimum debt service requirement coverage and the operating reserve balance to ensure that the debt meets the requirement before we issue the bonds in the future. The city engaged PRAG to complete a mandatory review of the city's debt policy, and analysis concluded that the city would issue the amount noted in the CIP through FY '29. At the December meeting, the board approved increasing the annual budgeted general obligation bond amount from $80 million to $125 million. As the issuance increases, Treasury would test the ratios, the debt service ratios, to ensure that we comply with the recommended benchmarks. And so today we have representatives from the Department of Planning to answer any questions that you may have on the capital improvement plan.
Do you have questions?
Oh, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Is it on?
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me? Good afternoon, Sarah Parnellum, Department of Planning. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
I've got one.
Yes.
The report says when you have increased amounts of bonds issued, it will be if you meet certain benchmarks, and I'd like to know what those benchmarks are.
Oh, so we had the trend analysis of the assessed value of of the property values. We also have it marked against the, sorry, I just went blank.
Service.
Huh? Yeah.
Debt service.
The debt service, yes.
And what debt service are you looking for the benchmark?
For the general obligation bonds, just general obligation bonds.
And what debt service calculation will you be looking for a benchmark?
This was adopted at the past several meetings, and we never had a benchmark.
It says that there will be a benchmark.
But there is going to be a benchmark once we adopted the increased bond issuance. So there is a benchmark with respect to debt service and with respect to property value of the city, the appraised property value of the city.
Well, what I'm looking for is what debt service coverage are you looking for? It says you'll meet certain benchmarks. Mm-hmm. And I'm satisfied with
Okay, so
explanation.
for instance, the pay down, like we have the percentage of pay down over the 5 years. So there would have to be normally 60% or above. That's one of the benchmarks that we look for in issuing the debt.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
There were 3 or 4 different
Yes.
benchmarks established in the proposal. One is, in fact, cash on hand to amount of GO debt. Some of it was somewhat, no, it wasn't complicated.
Yeah, it was a few, but I'll give them to you. Okay.
I'd like to offer congratulations. Oh, which one?
Right.
Okay. I'd like to offer congratulations. As Janelle will remember, for many years, when we look at this budget, I often say, well, let's pretend I'm a Greek shopkeeper, and I want to know how much money I have in the till at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. Or in other words, how much money did we have allocated, and how much did we spend, and how much do we have left to be spent? And that question for at least more than a decade was never answered. So I am personally very excited about, there's a section here, 2 or 3 paragraphs on process, which addresses that very issue. And I think it's terrific. Whoever initiated it should be praised.
We are working hard towards that. That is our goal. Yes,
It's
absolutely.
terrific.
Good, good.
It is really terrific.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have good news and I have good news. I don't have bad news. The good news is, and this was something I was actually going to raise later, is that we were doing one of the occasional exercises we do in our office just for fun. We read the charter, and it turns out that finance is actually supposed to be providing monthly operating statements to the Board of Finance. And so that is something we're going to be working with the Finance Department on, and that would answer exactly the questions that you've been looking to have answered. The question I have is about the 6-year nature of the CIP, and I am trying to understand the rationale under which some agencies, the amount of money in the CIP goes up and down. And that is, if it only went up, I would understand, given the change we made in how much we're going to be borrowing with GO bonds going forward, starting in '26. But it is not consistent. And the one I was specifically confused by was housing and community development goes up until 2027 and then takes a dramatic dip and then goes up, then goes up a little bit for 29 and 30. Meanwhile, general services is significantly lower, even though I think of them as being responsible for more infrastructure that needs capital help. They get they get a medium size increase next year, and then they come down again in 27, and then they go up in 28, and then they come down again in 29, and come down again in 30. And I'm unclear as to why general services isn't just getting a big chunk of increase when the GO bonds start to increase, and then continuing to get increases.
So there's 2 different answers to your 2 different examples. I'll start with general services. Sure. So as we're looking at an increase in general obligation bonds, we're also looking to make sure that we're investing in our existing assets. So we're trying to put in place a policy, we're working with the Department of Finance to put in place a policy where we're focusing 80% of the capital budget, at least 80% of the capital budget on our existing assets, and setting aside 20% for what I'll call special projects or new initiatives. And so as we're looking at those as kind of 2 separate buckets of funds, and we're going to be adding more details to this in future years, so we're just kind of preliminarily laying this out for the first time in this 6-year program, that 20% is going to shift from agency to agency. So it's going to be used to implement projects kind of all at once so that we can implement improvements to the new solid waste transfer facility in one fiscal year rather than spreading that out, you know, $1 million and $1 million and $1 million and $1 million. We're going to try and get that project fully funded in one fiscal year. So you'll see a spike for solid waste in the year that we're doing that. And then solid waste will come back down in a future year, because the next priority for that 20% might be a project in Rec and Parks, or it might be a project in DGS. And so that 20% is going to shift from agency to agency from year to year. And so because of that, the total for agencies is going to shift from year to year. Does that make sense?
That makes sense conceptually, I get that, and so that would explain why, for example, Rec and Parks is 19, 18, 46, 15, 15, 37. Yeah, I get that, okay. I guess the part I'm confused about is, and maybe this is just I'm missing some big jurisdictional issue, like what does housing and community development own that needs so much capital work every year and big increases from time to time?
So the answer for housing and community development is a little bit different. So as we're looking for the vacant housing initiative to really expand over the next several years, we expect by the time we're doing the next loan authorization that we'll kind of have a better sense of where the vacant housing initiative is progressing. And if it is progressing at the scale that's anticipated, then we won't be using general obligation bonds for some of the things that we're using now. The vacant housing initiative will be doing demolition and relocation and acquisition and stabilization and all those types of activities at the scale that we truly need them, rather than at the scale we're able to afford through GEO bonds. And so we'll be able to reallocate GEO bonds to focus on our public infrastructure.
I think you may have touched on the part that I was not thinking about. So demo of vacant houses counts as a capital expenditure for HCD.
It does.
Oh, I'm sorry. Usually I'm pretty good about turning that off before these. That would probably be a big chunk of it in my head.
So that's why you're seeing after, for 28, 29, and 30, the amounts for HCD will be going down. And that's dependent on, obviously, the vacant housing initiative moving forward at that scale for that shift to take place. But that's what we're anticipating. And so that's what's shown here.
But the part that I'm still not seeing, which I'm a little curious / concerned about, is I think it was fair to say that when you talk about the 80% going to our existing assets, that after you get out of public works, general services probably has the next biggest chunk of capital need.
Transportation.
Oh, I guess. Man, the state and that transportation trust fund has really screwed us over.
So,
right.
Yeah, transportation is going to be way up there. They're not going to rely on GEO bonds. They're going to rely on hybrid user funds, but they're going to be the next largest. And then you're going to see 80% federal funds in a lot of transportation projects. And so if you're just looking at totals by agency, transportation is going to be.
I guess what I'm looking for is I'm looking for either an acknowledgement that buried inside what we can easily see on these charts, general services is actually getting some appropriate large share of the GEO bond increase as the GEO bonds are increasing over the next several years.
I can pull that data out for you and
Okay.
give you a chart. We are working towards that effort. Are they getting as much as they need? No, but are they
Nobody's getting as much
additional
as they need,
resources?
yeah.
Yes,
But
and we can pull that out.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm really kind of
that's-
focused on, because we've had conversations with general services in so many contexts. I mean, not as much here, but at the Board of Estimates, on individual projects, and it was really sort of heavily implied that a big part of the recognition that we needed to raise our debt ceiling and that we could afford to raise our debt ceiling was around the just incredibly just the amount of deferred maintenance that we have allowed to accrue on city-owned buildings, and the periodic and increasing with frequency times when we have crises and emergent, fiscal emergencies around dealing with the fact that a building is no longer capable of supporting life because we just did not take care of it for decades. And then suddenly we find ourselves paying a ridiculous amount of money very quickly to deal with the immediacy of the need because we did not give DGS the straw they needed to make bricks all along. And so I just want to be sure that that is actually happening at the,
Yes.
the detail level that you guys work with.
It is, and I can pull that chart out for you. It'll take me a couple more minutes.
Oh,
and-
you can
yeah.
you can even say, I mean, I'm not going to.
Trying to do a pivot chart on the fly. and
Oh,
it's
yeah,
not-
no, please.
Yes, I can provide you that.
I would love to, if you could just send me that afterwards.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Two, I think they're quick questions. Utility revenue, I realize it's a minor number, but it sort of tails off to, what is it?
What is utility revenue? It is revenue that we receive through the water bills, and it's used for water, wastewater, and stormwater. So the majority of their projects are funded through revenue bonds and through county grants, but some of the funding is used from present day. What they take in is used for capital projects, and that shows as utility revenue.
So these are so-called operating profits? No?
I would
It's an
defer to the
it's an
Department of
enterprise
Finance for a more
fund.
technical
So all
explanation,
the
but
money that comes in as revenue has to go back into the system. Yeah.
Reinvested.
Yeah.
But this would be the excess of
It's-
revenues over expense? But the question is then, why does it
This-
disappear?
Because it's revenues, it's not the excess of revenues over expense. It's just,
dedicated to
it's
capital.
revenues that were dedicated to debt service, or to this. or
Not to debt
or
service,
I'm sorry,
to capital
To
projects.
capital projects. They are an expense.
The same way the general fund is present-day revenue, and then geo bonds is debt, just basically the same thing for the utilities. Utility revenue is present-day revenue.
It's PAYGO.
It's PAYGO utility
It's PAYGO
funds.
for the,
Yeah.
Okay.
for water and wastewater.
Okay.
Yes.
And one last question,
Sure.
I say it with a smile. Every year, you've made at least 5 or 6 predictions of what the revenues and expenditures will be in that year, because this is the rolling. Have you ever actually compared those projections for 6 years to the actual result?
So these are not expenditure, they're
Well,
programs.
are-
And we haven't done that in the past, but I'm very excited to say that in the future, we will be able to do that much better. So in the past, when agencies have submitted their requests, they are basically submitting fresh.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Every time, but they're not going to be doing that anymore. So what they're going to be starting from is what was approved previously. They will still be making changes to it, but we will be able to do a direct
So
comparison.
you can track your.
Yep. We
your-
will be
your
able to do that
projections.
going forward.
And just, you're probably almost statistically valid, because you've got 6 years to get there to do.
But to really just put a little more context on it, this is really the start of a new process. Right? For many years, we just had the same amount in the CIP, and it was very static, and it was sort of removed from the...
Believe me, I'm very aware of that. I've been looking at this for a long time. and
He's seen the 80 million
It-
flat.
which means that it was really removed from kind of the budget
this is
process, kind of like
great.
the
I
projection
think it's
process.
terrific.
So what you're going to see is the kind of activity that happens around the budget process, which includes projections, is going to join up with this. As you remember, we approved not 125, we approved up to 125. Whether we have enough money to do 125 becomes part of the budget process, and that's where the projections come from. But they're going to feed right back into this. So yeah, I'm very excited as well. Like there will be a lot more information
This is great stuff.
than we're used to.
It really is. Because look, I have to say, in the past, this was always a shot in the dark.
Absolutely. No, this is how I would say good capital budgeting is supposed to work, and we're.
And you have a big capital budget, you have an enormous capital budget.
I guess the only other question I have is I'm looking at the sources of funds over the 6-year plan, because when I first looked at how the total went, I was looking at how it's really high in '26, and then it comes down. And my first impulse was, oh, maybe we have to, finish spending the ARPA money, and that's going to be a big bump. But then I'm realizing that technically, it's the ARPA money, it's not in here,
not
right?
in here,
Yeah.
no.
So the big thing that is changing is there's a huge chunk of stormwater bonds in '26. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about why it's more than doubling from '25 to '26, and then it drops down to a quarter, and then and then eventually does go away.
I can get you more details from the Department of Public Works, but generally speaking, we know that the utilities are very lumpy. So they have projects that they are planning for and that they budget for, and then they get into the construction cycle for those projects. And so then we see less, funding being programmed as they're kind of moving through the construction for those, and then the next project. We tend to see that more for water and wastewater in the past than for stormwater. So that's a little bit surprising, but yeah, that's kind of the general response. But the specifics for this, I can follow up with the Department of Public Works.
I'm just kind of curious, like if I could see 15 years of capital budgets in a table instead of 6.
Going backwards.
Yeah, well, both. I guess going backwards would definitely be easier because it's here. Whereas you haven't done the next.
No, I don't have any for the 6 years forward.
The only reason I'm a little concerned about just going backwards is how far back does stormwater go? Because we've only had
Not quite
stormwater
15.
as revenue not quite 15 years. So I guess but even if we were just looking back for that period, would we see that there is like a 6-7 year cycle where stormwater does a big chunk of construction in years 1, 2, 3, and then doesn't do very much in years 4, 5, and 6, and maybe 7 or 8 or whatever, and then that's the cycle they're on, and then they ramp back up, do a whole lot, and come back down. It just seems like an unusual distribution for the lumpiness to be so spread out in terms of why they're not doing. I mean, if they have the money, why aren't they doing projects more evenly? I guess that's the best way I can think to ask that. But I guess it sounds like that's really more of a DPW question. But we'll be doing this again next week at the Board of Estimates. So maybe if you tell
Get you an answer.
Yeah, you
before
can
that.
we can have them ready to answer that question then. And then the similar question for the county grants, where they're, 115 million this year, 100 million next year, and then a drop to 34, and then back up to 122, and then drop down to 41 and 25. What are county grants just the general funds? Just us spending?
No, county grants are, we have a regional water system, and so county grants are what we receive.
Oh, that,
They follow the water cycle.
oh, that's what, okay.
Yeah, so that's
That's the money
the
from the other
participation
counties.
from Baltimore County,
Oh,
for
okay.
example, participating in a project. And so those have that same lumpiness, right?
Okay.
So they're participating in projects that are on kind of that, that flow of going through the construction process.
But it's not, the lumpiness for county grants is not on the same cycle as the lumpiness for water bonds or stormwater bonds.
The county is only participating, I believe, in projects that are located in the county. So
So that
again,
would-
we can kind
yeah.
of dig into those details
Okay.
further, but that's kind of the high-level answer.
Okay. I think those are the only questions I had.
I noticed, and this isn't a criticism, the amount spent for parks and recreation seemed like a large figure compared to public works, and I just wondered what your thoughts were about that.
We have a lot of deferred maintenance on rec centers.
Can you
Same
say the
answer.
question again?
I just noticed the figure for parks and recreation seemed to be quite large relative to, say, public works, and I just wondered, I was sort of curious about how that was ascertained.
I think the percentage, I don't have the percentages in front of me, is much smaller for Rec and Parks than Public Works.
I thought the figure
I
was,
think you're on the wrong line. There you are.
Recreation and Parks is 4%, and Public Works is more than half. Are we,
I'm on the wrong line.
okay.
One other thought. You say you're going to, we'll be getting squeezed by the state, of course, and that'll probably continue. What's the basis that you think, you say, well, you'll advocate for more highway user funds. Do you expect anything to come from that?
That is in progress. It looks like the director wants to speak to that.
There are very important conversations happening right now, and they will keep happening next year. A lot of the conversation is about just showing the work that we did with highway user revenue. A lot of those projects got started 2 years ago, last year, and they'll be coming online. So the city is very focused on the importance of highway user revenue for keeping these projects going because they're all multi-year. And we do believe that we will be able to show progress, we will be able to show the roads that are completed, and that will aid us in future negotiations. This is all kind of happening in real time as we speak right now, but at least for this upcoming year, it does look like we will continue receiving highway user revenue at the level we got last year, and we are going to look to all of our friends to maintain that momentum.
My apologies, now I thought of a new question. Is there a standard distribution of highway user revenue between operating capital, or does that fluctuate every year depending on, I don't know, a cage match or something like that? Like, how do we if we get $100 million in highway user revenue one year and 120 the next year, is there any kind of standard split
Right.
for operating and capital?
There is, and it's heavily tilted towards capital, and it's sort of done by formula, so there's no competition aspect to it.
Okay.
On operating, we really just cover the inflationary increase of existing programs, and on capital, everything else goes to capital, including all the HUR and anything else we can.
Everything else
dredge
is the difference. So when it increases, the difference goes to capital,
Yeah,
except
so-
what covers inflation.
Exactly. So when we get more, 100% of that net goes to capital.
So when we say, like, we've got 69,300,000 in highway user revenue for capital in 2025. How much did we get total? or how much are we expecting total, such that, how much of that is going to operating? Or not, I'm sorry, not how much, but how much of the highway user funds is going to operating compared to the 69.3 that's going to capital?
I don't have the numbers. I don't know if you have the numbers.
I don't have the
Okay,
number for
right.
FY '25 off the top of my head. But, so, it's not that a percentage is determined each year, it's that there is an amount that's needed for transportation operations.
Right.
We kind of know what that number is. That is, kind of historically was a larger share of the highway user revenue was for operating. But as we're getting more money, all of that money is going towards capital except what is needed for inflation.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is because I'm seeing that number take a $25 million jump in 2026 in terms of we're expecting to get 25 million more.
Right, so if the formula that was passed stays in place, which is what the director was referring to, the conversations
Okay.
are happening as we speak, but if it stays in place, that is what the city would be projected to get an increase, and that increase would go to capital.
And then does the precipitous drop starting in 2028 reflect the existing formula?
It sunsets,
It sunsets,
the increase sunsets.
the increase sunsets. Okay. And so this is just us being uber responsible about not projecting that we would actually get a reasonable amount of money, and instead projecting that we will get next to nothing because we have no guarantee of getting more.
That is correct.
Okay.
This represents law. It does not represent what we think is fair or
Right.
needed. It represents law.
Because
current law.
my recollection is that from pre-Great Recession, we used to get something in the $200 million range in
You-
highway user revenue.
Way back.
Your recollection is correct, and that is a really important point. We were getting really, that's right, over 200, which means more than even with this influx we're currently getting now. There is this gap starting at the Great Recession and going for over 10 years. That gap has cost the city $900 million during that time frame.
Yeah, what I remain confused about, and I'm not, this isn't anything you guys are responsible for, I'm just trying to understand why it, like, did the state just spend less on transportation for everybody? Because my understanding is that we used to get big chunks of highway user revenue because we maintained our own roads, and SHA maintains everybody else's. Did they spend $1 billion less on everybody else's also? Or are we just, you used a nicer term than screwed, what was, something with also, what was, yeah, are we also being mistreated? Are we just being mistreated?
We are. We were. It was in part, rectified with HUR as it currently exists, but the state balanced its Great Recession budget on our backs. That difference in how we have to pay for our own roads compared to the rest of the state worked against us in how the state ended up allocating money for this. So this is a very Baltimore City specific issue.
Bill, I did suggest we should get more.
Yes. No, you just used a nicer term for what the state did to us, I couldn't remember it. Okay.
But so this represents what current law looks like. We strenuously believe that HUR needs to, at the very least, be continued at the levels we're seeing now, and we will update you all and appreciate your support.
We can send you a history of highway user revenue and points at which the law has changed, if you're interested.
I would love that, especially if it could be like 20 years, so I got
It goes
those,
back
got
to-
those numbers back to the beginning of the 21st century.
2004.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that includes your earlier request for the 15 years of prior information related to the schedule?
Yeah, well, that was more about trying to understand.
The historic.
Trying to understand the
Stormwater.
cycle of the lumpiness for stormwater.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have stormwater and county grants, understanding the distribution and why it's uneven. For DGS, the GEO bond allocation and kind of what's going on there, and then the history of highway user revenue.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? And Janelle, from a board perspective, you are looking today for a vote on approving this particular plan.
Yes.
And with that in mind, I'd like to entertain a motion for the approval of the CIP for the fiscal years 2025 through 2030.
Move to approve?
It's been moved. Is there a second? And seconded.
Nope, second right, friend.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you. That motion has passed. Is there any other business to be brought before us today?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so today I wanted to bring the board up to date on the fact that the mayor had announced a $3 billion comprehensive plan to address the vacant properties in Baltimore. And with that, it will be using TIFs. And in our proposal, normally what happens is that we would bring to the board a conceptual plan. And then the next meeting, we will come with the legislative package to be approved. Because this is a very aggressive schedule that we're on, we want to move from, we want to consolidate the conceptual and the package together at the May meeting. And so that's my request, is that when we bring forth this package for the TIF, that we consolidate. We're trying to get to the city council at the June meeting to present the proposal at the June meeting. And so,
If you're trying to get it to the city council at a meeting in June, you could still bring the conceptual to the Board of Finance in April and do the legislative in May.
that is true, but we're still putting the package together. So
Oh, and you don't think you'll have the,
it
you
ready
don't think you'll have the conceptual done by April?
by April, right, but we'll have it by May.
Could we go back to the beginning? How much is this TIF?
Okay, so the TIF is not the TIF, the program is the $3 billion program, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's a $3 billion program. The TIF portion is $100 million.
Okay, and explain to me what it's for?
Do you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, you can.
I want to clarify a little bit, just but the size and just what this is. Let me start with what this is. The city and state have been working closely together on this vacant housing program. The state is right now discussing putting in a very large amount of money. It's almost past the state budget. That was meant to be in conjunction with a city contribution. The kind of main way that the city is doing this is with a new kind of TIF. This is going to be a non-contiguous TIF that is defined not around a specific geographic area, but around vacant building notices themselves. And the city, as opposed to a corporate sponsor, is actually going to be the presenter on this. We'll be bringing a list of a couple thousand properties. That detail's still being worked out. That's why Janelle was just kind of referring to the details aren't done yet. But when they're done, the city's going to bring a list of properties that are going to make up this TIF. The incremental property tax revenue on these properties, when they're rehabbed and brought to market, will ultimately support this TIF. The amount we're not set on yet. That was the one caveat I wanted to make. We'd been tossing around $100 million based on a combination of market factors, what's ready now, kind of what's on the ground. But the city is still developing that part of it. We're still trying to figure out if we are going to put the legislation through in one go or in tranches. The one thing we already know is we will be doing the debt issuance in tranches because we are going to want to see that these properties are performing, that since the city is kind of the partner on this, that these properties, after being rehabbed, are being sold off, people are moving into them, and people are starting to pay their property taxes.
Is
Are
there,
these abandoned homes and buildings?
These are currently abandoned homes and buildings.
So that's the purpose of this program?
That's right.
Okay.
but it's going to be abandoned properties and buildings that are not currently owned by the city?
So the city will be using legal tools to acquire some properties that are not currently owned, in addition to using its portfolio of properties that are owned. So they'll be passing through the city. We'll bring a lot more detail on this, because this is right now all still just kind of being pieced together.
It's terribly complicated. You mean, haven't they already been seized for tax sale?
Your microphone. It's on, just, no.
Haven't they already been
You
seized?
turned it off.
You just
Tax sale?
You turned it off.
You just turned your microphone off.
Have not they already been seized through tax sales?
They have, it is not through tax sale, and that's actually a kind of common misconception, so let me take a
Okay,
second to.
I'm guilty.
No worries, absolutely. So let me take a further step back. When somebody stops paying their taxes, at some point, when they walk away from a property, at some point, the city will put that parcel through tax sale. What that means is we're letting a third party come in and make one last attempt to collect what's owed. If at that point, no taxes are paid, and it's a lengthy process that can take a couple of years, then basically that third party can potentially take over that property. That is different from the in rem process by which the city acquires property.
Actually, can we jump in for a second?
Please.
I think the part that's missing is that at some point in the past, I've not been able to identify exactly when it happened, but it was either towards the end of the Schmoke administration or the beginning of the O'Malley administration. I hate saying it this way, but back in the 1900s,
Yeah.
when a property went up for tax sale, if nobody bought it, if nobody bought the certificate, the city just automatically, as a policy, went through and foreclosed itself and took it. But at some point around the turn of the millennium, we stopped doing that as a matter of policy. And so that's why there are literally tens of thousands of vacant houses out there still technically owned by a variety of absentee owners, sometimes estates of absentee owners, but they're not owned by the city.
So this is,
But there's still a problem, and that's why we need in rem to now get control of them,
why
because we
didn't
didn't.
why didn't we continue the policies of the
Because-
1990s?
Because once we do that, not only is it cost a little bit of money to do that, but then we're responsible for that vacant house in terms of maintenance of it.
Liability.
And liability, and so the city made the decision that it couldn't afford to automatically do that with every property.
Just an observation, this will be a very complicated financing structurally. You don't have the special tax backing it up, and
Yeah.
it's going to be very, very interesting to see
So
what
we're,
you come up with.
We're working right now with MuniCap to basically put together what the structure of this looks like. And yeah, we definitely want to leave plenty of room to discuss it. This is an unusual structure. It's not how TIFs are normally done. Again, and just that we're kind of our own backers on this, and that it's not done around a geographical area. It's done around vacancy. But just to kind of go back to the beginning. So this is going to be a mechanism for work to be funded on houses that are currently vacant or abandoned, that the city will use various mechanisms to acquire and then do a number of different interventions with. It's a big package of reforms, and then ultimately put back on the market so that somebody can move in and start paying taxes on that property. And I just wanted to kind of make that clarification that it's the city doesn't acquire houses through tax sale. The city acquires houses through interim, through basically when somebody's bills have become larger than the value of the property. The city at that point, and this is a new ability of the cities, can now step in and file to acquire that property.
In
Any
the,
other
I
municipal?
think Arnold was
Oh,
gonna-
sorry.
in the timing of a transaction from, we're going to acquire this, that's a long process?
So go ahead.
Because where I'm going, I'm just trying to make sure, you indicated that there'll be tranches. So when Muni Cap is presenting to us, they will have forecast
Yes.
of the revenue cycle
Yes.
and the spending cycle.
Yes. The overall process, beginning to end, and by end I mean the bringing to market of the house and it being actually filled with a taxpayer, that can take around 2 years. The acquisition process is much faster than it used to be because we have the interim tool now. So we're not going through the full foreclosure process, which in itself could take 2 years. We're going through the shortened interim process, which just takes a few months. And then we're doing the different types of interventions that the Department of Housing and Community Development can speak to in a lot more detail. And yeah, beginning to end, it's about 2 years, which is why we were conceiving of doing the debt issuance in 2-year tranches, in defining the TIF district of potentially eligible homes, then identifying homes that were ready to move on now, and that being the first tranche, and then coming back for future tranches depending on the performance of the first tranche.
And do we also know the agency that will manage the process?
It's DHCD, City DHCD.
And I just wanted to make a note that the TIFs, the bonds will be issued in arrears. So we're already going to have like a baseline of the properties, of some of the properties that have already been rehabbed and have established some increments in those. So in the first tranche, the initial tranche, we'll be using that tax base, those increments, to pay for the debt service on the bonds.
So I just had a question again about the schedule. So right now, the ask is to have both the conceptual conversation about this with details, like an actual report of some type, and also approve the legislative package associated with it at the same meeting in May, so that the legislation can be introduced in June?
Introduced, correct.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the ask.
Is the expectation that the city council has to pass the legislation by a certain time?
There is a goal of getting the legislation passed in the fall so that we can begin putting money on the ground in the winter. This money is meant to be kind of partner money to the state money, and the state money, and fingers crossed because it's going through that final process, but it becomes available to us starting on July 1. So there is some amount of time pressure. It's not precise, but when you kind of work backwards from what does it look like for us to actually do this work and for it to be lined up with the state, because it's going to become part of the conversation for next year's state budget of what did the city do and what did the state do, is we would have to get it passed by the fall, and over the summer, there's really just one July council hearing and one August council hearing, which means it would be very important to get this introduced in June to allow the summer for deliberation.
Okay, so the next question I ask is going to be, have you talked to the council president about this in terms of, is the council president on board with the schedule that you're envisioning, such that the Board of Finance should contort its normal process to match this schedule because everybody else is on board with it?
We have received requests both from the council president and from several council members to ensure that the council is able to move on this particular item basically with enough time left that it doesn't press up against the end of the year. So we've had broad conversations. I know at a staff level, MOGR is working with the council president's office, and we did come up with this date as a result of those conversations. I don't know that we've had like the exact conversation, but we certainly can to make sure that we're all aligned.
Here's what I would like to propose as a way to accomplish the goals that the administration has laid out without the Board of Finance having to abbreviate its normal amount of deliberation, is if you brought the conceptual in May for the Board of Finance to discuss, and then introduce the bill in June. I believe you can introduce. Can you not introduce the TIF?
I will need to check
without. Actually, that's a good question.
I will need to check with law.
Yeah. Can we introduce a TIF before finance, before the Board of Finance has approved it, or does they have to approve the introduction? We have to approve the introduction.
I think we have to approve the introduction.
Then, okay. Then I would amend my suggestion to ask if the board would maybe consider meeting earlier in June than the last Monday, because my recollection is that there are a greater than usual number of council meetings in June to process the budget, which means there should be at least one or two meetings available in mid-late June that this could be introduced if we held June's Board of Finance meeting the second week of June instead of the 4th.
That would work for the administration if other board members are comfortable with that. What we were pressed up against is the Board of Finance meeting was just a few days after the last scheduled council meeting. If we could even just move it back a week, I think that would actually work.
That's fine.
So the proposal is still in May to give you the conceptual, to get the conceptual approval in May, and then in June, bring the whole package to you.
Yeah, but move the Board of Finance meeting up so that we can do that before the last meeting of the council.
Correct. Okay.
Janelle, does that give you enough time to file with the council? Or what does the process look like? Or maybe this is an MOGR question.
Or a council president question.
Or to submit to the
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Wednesday, the Hopper deadline is the Wednesday before the board meeting, I believe. So if the
So-
board meeting, I'm sorry, not board meeting, city, council meeting. That's what 3 years down here has done to me. If the council meeting is the last Monday in June, then the Hopper deadline will be the Wednesday the week before, which means we could have the Board of Finance meeting the Monday before the council meeting, and that should fit.
And Janelle, you have a sense from the board that they're willing to shift the meeting. And I just think you all work that out.
We'll
And
work out the
then-
schedule and
And
we'll
as
let you
soon
know.
as you can, get it on the board members' calendar.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Any other business to be brought before us?
No other business.
If you dare.
No other business, thank you.
A motion for adjournment.
Second.
Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned.
I think you get unanimous consent on that.